Hello, everyone. This is a call, and what I want to talk about today are peak sexual experiences and how peak sexual experiences essentially program our behaviors. So, the first thing, though, is I would like to encourage you to share this video if you find it useful, and also if you have not subscribed, please press the subscribe button down below. So, peak sexual experiences are essentially experiences which are highly erotic, very intense, and usually involve orgasm. One of the things that we don't understand oftentimes is in those of us who have abstained from ejaculation for periods of time do understand this, which is how powerful orgasm is in terms of like how it brings our nervous system, our endocrine system, and ultimately the energy we experience into flux. So, and the most basic way to look at this is pre-cum, post-cum, you are a different person. Um, Things that you were doing before you had an orgasm are oftentimes maybe not what you want after orgasm. So, in other words, you feel one way in the heat of the moment and a different way after. So, and that's basically the power of this energy that builds, 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 and then all of a sudden, as there's an orgasm or ejaculation, poof, the energy collapses. And I should say that also, not necessarily talking about orgasm in terms of the energy collapse, it's more about ejaculation in terms of energy collapse. Because you can have orgasms without ejaculation. So the one way to also to kind of think about this idea of that we are programming ourselves is to consider your kinks, consider your fantasies, consider ultimately your behaviors, and so we'll look at the kinks and the fantasies first. So kinks and fantasies are simply I like to look at it as energies rising and it grabs hold of our baggage on the way up to the surface. So that baggage could be trauma, that baggage could be any of a number of things. But what I want to specifically target here and look at is, let's say, pornography. How are we programming ourselves with pornography? Uh, and so how we do this, and it's not simply because you're interested in looking at something, you're looking at some image and whatever. You know, a lot of the times what it requires repetition. So something may seem attractive at first, and there may be some reason that you want to go look at it. And again, that's perfectly fine, but just be very conscious of the fact that if you're applying a again, an orgasm or an ejaculation to some pornographic material, in all likelihood, you begin the process of etching that into your psyche. And then over time, what it does is it wants to be expressed. Now, something being expressed doesn't necessarily mean that we have to act out. Oftentimes, the expression can be a thought, it can be a feeling. It is simply the kink or the fantasy rising to the surface in which we have the opportunity to be conscious too. So, if we can witness, be objective with, and be conscious of something rising to the surface, we can apply choice. So, because I assure you, a lot of the times when again, this is my own personal experience, but also many men that I've counseled, is that you start to pursue these kinks and these fantasies, and the best way I can describe it is often there is buyer's remorse. Fantasy is often better than reality, and so again, as all these thoughts start to rise to the surface, I want you to think deeper about what I'm going to say now. So when I was going through school, I studied applied exercise physiology, and when I was in the master's program, we talked a lot about this like 40-day period of time. And this 40-day period of time was it was always in reference to the nervous system, but specifically they would say, oh, you're lifting weights or you're doing chest presses or whatever it is. So you're doing some sort of exercise, and for the first 40 days you get stronger, but you don't notice any change in, let's say, the muscle size or quote unquote the cross sectional area of the muscle. And the reason for that is because it's not the physical tissues that adapt initially, it's the nervous system. As the nervous system becomes more and more efficient and it sends the signal to the tissues to contract in a particular way, those contractions become more efficient. We learn a skill, muscle memory is developed. And so again, that's a 40-day period of time. And the 40-day period of time is biblical. It's, when I was going through yoga, Kundalini yoga teachers training, we talked about 40 days as a period of time it takes to adopt a new pattern. So this adoption of a new pattern, like I said, it applies very directly to what it is that we fantasize about. So what I want you to do is I want you to reflect on those things you fantasize about, those things you have kinks about, and ask yourself, did I program that in there? Because again, if you have a peak experience, you have all this your endocrine system, your nervous system. An orgasm is a supercharge. And this is one of the reasons that so many mystical traditions and spiritual traditions like to focus on sexual energy and specifically the orgasm. And I think the French call it la petite mort. My French sucks. The little death. So the point is that it has an unbelievably powerful impact on our bodies and our psyche. So let's look at the mind real quick. So the mind is not the brain. We have to separate those two things. The patterns that we essentially live in our life, the matrix, so to speak, it doesn't exist in the brain. The pattern that we live out actually exists in your field. So it is the energy body. It is the subtle energy around your body. It is your aura. And it's within that field that we have patterns programmed. And this is kind of, in some ways, this would be kind of a generic way of how karma works, let's say you have, and again, when I do energy work on clients, I can feel patterns in someone's field with my hands. And it just feels like, okay, there's a trauma here and it feels hard. I mean, literally, energetically, it feels hard or like something solid and dense. And so what ends up happening is that that pattern is on a loop. And that pattern will have an associated area in your brain and in your endocrine system, which then produces, and again, in turn, the nervous system, etc. But essentially what ends up happening is that pattern will continue to cycle through a loop, and you will continue to, re-experience it in some particular ways. And so one of the problems is that, particularly with traumatic experiences, is we don't want to look at it, right? So we don't want to look at it. It gets repressed. It gets put off to the side. And so what ends up happening is it goes on what I call the stupid loop. And there's a part of the brain that's very connected to the stupid loop, and I believe it's called the hippocampus. Don't quote me on that. So the stupid loop continues. PTSD is a bit like the stupid loop, and I don't mean to diminish anyone who has PTSD, but it is a loop. It's something that continues to reoccur over and over again, even though the reality is it's not real, right? We experience it as real because our nervous system and our endocrine system is very much still connected to that loop, but it doesn't exist in the brain. That's what I'm trying to emphasize here. So, and so life actually wants you to sort these things out. Let me get back to the karma idea. So life wants you to sort these things out. So you will attract other individuals, you will attract experiences which are here to aid you in helping you sort that out, that trauma out. And in the case of a kink or a fantasy, which may or may not be related to a childhood trauma or something that happened in your 20s or whatever it may be, and oftentimes it's related to what you masturbated to repeatedly. And and again, what you masturbated to repeatedly may be related to something that happened in your childhood, some trauma, etc. So what ends up happening is that life presents circumstance for us to work it through. In this particular case, life, your subconscious, will draw to the surface a fantasy, a fixation, an obsession for you to witness and to be conscious of and to make a choice about, not to repress nor express. And if you want to express your kinks and fantasies, that's up to you, and then you can determine based on that point whether that was satisfying or not. I know, like I said, I fulfilled many of my fantasies in my 20s, and I found the vast majority to be deeply unfulfilling. Some of the other ones I found somewhat fulfilling, but ultimately the reason I found them somewhat fulfilling was just because I grew to understand why I guess why I wanted to do it in the first place. So you can't be on autopilot. That's what I'm trying to get at here with like your kinks and things like that. And some kinks become so ingrained in our field that they become part of our lifestyle. They become part of who we are. Now, uh, through the process of meditation, through the process of being aware, we end up, like I said, we end up being able to perceive these things as they rise to the surface. And and like I said, they start to change over time, and you have to be patient with the process. And again, like individuals may show up in your life to help you work through those processes. You know, I've had partners show up in my life to help me work through I guess, some of my sexual issues. I didn't realize it at the time, but in a lot of ways, that's why they were in my life. These various women helped me work through issue XYZ. And as I was with that woman and issue XYZ started to become more obvious, I was like, oh gosh, this is why I want to do this or why I want to do that, whatever it is. Um, like I said, it became obvious why that person was in my life. So again, keep in mind 40 days, if you're masturbating to something, you are going to etch it into your field. This is what happens. So how do we deprogram, other than meditation, objectivity, witnessing, becoming conscious of something? Another way we can deprogram the field is, again, it's that moment of choice. This is a very, very fine line. It's that you could teeter one way or the other at this moment, right? So you have a moment you have to choose whether to do something to act out or to express that energy or to repress that energy, because expressing and repressing are on the same side. If you repress, like I said, it continues on its loop. If you express, it continues on its loop, because both ways you are feeding it. You're feeding it energy. Okay, so if you want that energy back, you simply stay objective with it, you stay conscious of it, and you choose, and you direct your energy, your choice towards, you have to ask yourself, like a Christian might say, what would Jesus do? All right, that would be like a Christian's way of saying, okay, how can I elevate this and take it to a higher level? You know, and it doesn't matter what your religion or spirituality or your faith is. Every one of us has a sense that there is something higher, right? Something greater. So for me, what I would do is say, okay, I like mental clarity. I like my immune system. I want to have visions. I want to have a sharp intuition. I want to be connected, and I want to be in the flow as much as possible. And the way for me to do that was simply to choose to not act out, one, and two was to, again, for me, the God concept, source, whatever, that has always been my focal point. So I would direct my awareness towards source. And so if I wanted to do XYZ kink, I'd be like, all right, where's that going to take my sexual energy? Or if I was looking at pornography and masturbating and I wanted to ejaculate, before I would ejaculate, I'd ask myself, where's that going to take my energy? And this is a simple question. You can ask yourself every single time that you have a sexual engagement, whether it's masturbation or with a partner, or you want to do some kinky thing or whatever. And this is not a place for you to necessarily, oh, I'm making a judgment here, but it's a moment of reflection that says, what is it that where do I want my energy to be? Do I want my energy to be elevated, or do I want my energy to essentially, in the case of ejaculation, to collapse back down? So, and I wish there was a more clear way to kind of state this, but like I said, it is that sort of moment. And I think every one of us has a sense of that there's something higher or greater, and we can direct our choices towards that. So with all that said, hopefully you find this video helpful. And again, please share. And with all that said, thanks. Appreciate it.